Hi, I'm Corey Nathan, and this is Talking Politics and Religion Without Killing Each Other. Your home for engaging conversations about the topics that matter most in our culture. If you love nuance, if you want to better understand different points of view, if you're tired of the screamers taking all the oxygen out of the room, if you'll enjoy edifying, provocative, and fun conversations among high-profile public figures and regular folks like me, you love talking politics and religion without killing each other. Thanks for spending some time with us. Enjoy today's show. All right, welcome. We are talking politics and religion without killing each other. I'm your host, along with our co-host and my dear old dad, Ronnie Nathan. How you doing, Pops?
I'm good. How are you?
Well, I'm doing pretty good. This is take two, by the way. We had a blackout, so we already did this part of the show, but we're doing it again. And shout out to my friend Tristan Drew, who's our co-producer. And by the way, if you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, leave us a review on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasts, and follow us on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and Instagram. Now, you might have heard the name Ryan Meeks a few years ago as the pastor of a huge church who had the audacity to say that gay people would be welcome as part of Eastlake's church community. And it was very scandalous in the Christian community. But in all seriousness, to focus on the church's version of a TMZ's headline is really not doing Ryan justice. Ryan was founder, curator, and leader of Eastlake until fairly recently, after leading a very different, evolutionary, transformative church community for 16 years. Now, one can simply say Ryan's life work is to help people feel alive. And having endured everything from the scrutiny of the entire American evangelical movement to beating cancer, that simple yet profound raison d'etre to help people feel alive is quite substantive. And the more I've learned about today's guest, the more depth and substance there is. Ryan Meeks, thank you for joining us. How are you?
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Excited to be on the podcast.
Yeah. Thanks for doing this. So why don't we, just to draw some context here, could you give us a little sense of your background? You were a pastor's kid. You grew up in the church.
Yeah. My father was a minister in a little backwater denomination that's called Foursquare, which is connected to the Pentecostal side of evangelical Christianity. And it was also a megachurch. When I was about 6 months old, my dad moved up to the Northwest to help plant this church from scratch with a team from Eugene, Oregon. Kind of came out of that whole Jesus sandals hippie church movement stuff. Yeah, essentially that became one of the early mega churches in the late 70s, early 80s. And that's the church that I grew up in. So it was like, back then it was really edgy to have like drums and electric guitar or whatever. And they were fighting some of the culture wars in those days. And then I sort of got to watch this rapid expansion of a church as a young kid and watch my dad develop as a leader. So for the most part, it was a really positive experience. The church gave me a community to lean on and a narrative to live inside of, a meaning system that helped me navigate the slings and arrows of growing up.
Yeah.
Experience for the most part.
Now, one doesn't have to look too far to know that you've gone through quite a evolution and transformation yourself on your spiritual journey. Yeah. Was there ever a point when you felt pretty sure about most of the basics, or were you always sort of more of a truth seeker that's like surfing the waves of what became apparent to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that, like most people, as I developed through, stages of awareness or stages of faith, to use Fowler's term, or even just childhood development, the younger I was, the more certain that at least that my parents had the truth and the church had the truth. And so I was just sort of collecting agreements with these authority figures, whether they're my parents or my youth pastors or the institution itself of the church. And then as I got probably to my early teens, junior high, high school, that's when I sort of fell deeply into my own spirituality in the sense of I was owning it from a passion and energy perspective, but I was very much doing it within the confines or within the fence line of the tradition I was raised in. So I wasn't really pushing the edges within my tribal awareness, but I was owning it from an energetic perspective. What I mean is, like, I was personally taking my own time to go deeper into what I would have called the faith at that point. Yeah.
Right. And did you end up going to like Bible college, seminary, all that
Yep.
stuff? Where'd you go?
So I went to, they don't want to be associated with me, but I went, there's a Assembly of God school in the Northwest called Northwest University. And I went there for a short bit and really had a hard time, because at that point I was already married with one child and I was asking way too many questions for my Bible teachers. And I did well. I got good grades. I was on the dean's list, but I learned really quickly that what the preferred model of student was someone who was learning the company line, not somebody who was constantly playing devil's advocate or asking from a different angle. And I mean, I was really seeking at that point, trying to ground my spirituality in something that didn't make me feel like I had to assassinate my mind to buy into. There was so much presupposition in the teaching that I wasn't already on board with. And so that was both frustrating for myself because I'm paying money and being told we don't have time for this. Right. And it's frustrating for them because the rest of the class was ready to move on. You know, they were like, yep, right on. The Bible says it, that settles it, kind of a thing. And I'm like, wait a minute, we still haven't addressed why we should place all this authority here. And primarily it wasn't because I was trying to push against it. It's because I was actually friends with people who were not Christians. Right. And so I'm thinking to myself, this doesn't make any sense unless you're on the inside, friends. Like, I'm here to learn how to share the gospel with people who don't buy into this worldview at the beginning. And so we need to go backwards and start by building a logic that's going to make sense to other people. And this really wasn't what they were selling. Yeah. So I didn't stay long. And then I'd taken some, institute classes and some seminarians who had done or not seminary teachers who had done institutes at churches. You know what I'm talking about? Various churches will set up their own courses and institutes. And I'd done a number of those hodgepodge together, but never finished. Ultimately ended up spending most of my time apprenticing at different churches. Eventually my father's church in San Diego. Okay. When I moved down there, I want to say in 1999 or 2000, I can't remember which. And the whole point was, I want to go down there and learn and apprentice under someone who will actually give me access so I can get all the way into this thing, learn everything I can, and go back and plant a church someday in the Northwest. So that's what I did. Which you ultimately did, I think, in 2005. But before we get into Eastlake, you're not the first person who's come on to Talking Politics and Religion to share something very similar to that. Recently, we talked to a good friend of mine, Samir Yadav, who's a prof up at Westmont, and he did undergrad at Masters College, or now Masters University. Described a lot of the same thing as he started diving into some of the coursework there. Masters for his first master's degree, not his undergrad. Gotcha. He had a habit of reading the source material and then reading the references, the reading the material that was referenced in the source material. And he would come with other questions. And it's like, whoa, wait a second. That's not what we do here. We don't actually, look into stuff and question and grapple. And here are the answers. And he's recently actually wrote an essay, something along the lines of, the Bible says it, I believe it, that settles it. Yeah. What is that? Is that like a cultural thing? Is that a colonial thing? Is that like, what are the ingredients? Because that's just not a very unique experience for someone to enter a church or a school to be like, no, dude, you're asking way too many questions. Yeah. Well, there's a number of layers and by the way I look at it, one is it's a Western assembly model of education that is partly the problem. You have an assembly line, plug in the material and get them out the door. We're not being taught how to think. We're being taught what to think. And that's a very different reality. I mean, today we're not even teaching kids civics anymore. And I'm sure that's something you're talking about in this podcast, this lack of awareness of how our government actually functions by just regular citizens. We're so distanced from that stuff because we're not even taught that in public schools. So that's one part of the problem, is the assembly line model of education that the West has certainly bought into. The other complexity here is evangelicalism. I mean, it's fundamentalism. So that's how you teach fundamentalism. You tell them this is what you have to believe. And if you don't believe this, you're in threat of going to hell. So let's just keep cycling in this, I don't know, this performative contradiction that really doesn't stand on anything substantive. It's just, you have to think this, so you have to think this. And, you know, that's going to frustrate anyone who wants to stretch their mind and exercise their brain. And
so I have a question.
Yeah.
When you went, after all of your apprenticeships, and you went to the Northwest to plant a church, was your concept of a church an evangelical Christian church?
Yes, absolutely. I was sold out. Yeah.
So in other words, this evolution from accepting the fundamental truths and spreading them, as opposed to questioning what's behind those truths, that's something that happened to you after you planted this church.
Correct. So what was happening to me when I'm in these Bible classes is something that's innate to who I am was coming up. I was questioning these things. I felt like the freedom and the desire to do those things. As I got further into the machine, I realized that I was good at leading, organizing, you know, all of the skill sets that are good for basically CEO business model megachurch world. And so the questions and the personal pursuit of truth was less. I was just in a stage of life in my early 20s, which was about building. I wasn't so much flipping back into some sort of contemplative posture at that stage of my life. Working for my dad, I had 2 kids at that point. I now have 4, but at that point, it's just that stage of life had changed. Instead of being that sort of young college kid who's asking questions and wrestling with the world, I was in an early, young, married family stage, which is about stability and structure. And so at that point, you know, the consciousness of such a person isn't really in that same space that single college mind is at. And for me, as you just pointed out, that came back online later, probably closer to when I turned 30, was when it really started to crank.
Some other version of the hounds of heaven, you know. So it sounds like at a certain point, maybe around 2010, you had started to have this awakening. But by that time, I mean, Eastlake was pretty well established. That's got to be pretty world rocking, you know, to reckon with the possibility that a lot of your fundamental beliefs are bullshit. But I have however many souls that you were leading at that time. That's got to be pretty scary.
It was very scary. And I certainly wasn't at a place in 2010 where I would have called any of it bullshit. I was a dark night of the soul that had begun. And it was only starting because the church had been so successful. And I finally had the staffing and the support and the finances and a facility where I wasn't doing the busy work of an entrepreneurial startup anymore. I was running a large organization. And because of that, I could start asking questions again. And I could take a deep breath and sit down and go, what do I want to say? You know, I had been teaching my dad's sermons and my mentor's sermons and all these other mega church pastor guys who gave me their resources and like, look, you don't have time for, you know, sermon writing, just use these outlines, you know, write your own jokes and stories. And it was great. I felt so supported and loved by that community. But by the time we were large enough and I had the space and time, I could finally go, you know what do I want to say? And I was at a different stage in life where I was back to asking those questions because I'd already sort of arrived. The church was way bigger than I ever dreamed it would ever get. And we were only a few years in. So here I was at the top of, you know, at least one of the ladders that I'd decided to climb and was like, there's got to be more. Like there has to be, I don't feel as close to God as I feel like I should at this point. Like I'm doing all this stuff. We're seeing all this radical transformation. Beautiful things were happening in people's lives. And yet I didn't feel any closer to God. And that's been a theme in my whole life. I remember even in junior high, in my Pentecostal youth group, feeling like everyone else had God talk to them and visions and dreams. And it never happened to me. I always felt sort of like a junior varsity Christian my whole life, but I was committed to what I believed was a healthy pathway for living well on earth with others and with God. And the question of God wasn't even a question to me at that point, or even up until 2010. I assumed the reality of God. And what I was trying to do was figure out what that meant within this Christian framework and how I could explain that in a way that both felt authentic to what I was experiencing in my own version of following Jesus, and something that I could communicate, because that's another part of my wiring. I just am someone who will communicate what I'm learning and experiencing for the benefit of others. And I wasn't feeling like I could do that authentically anymore. And that's what started me down the road of asking the deeper question and go, well, if this, then what about this? And then if that, well, what about that? And much like your friend, I mean, I think I started reading books I wasn't supposed to be reading. And then I bibliographied my way through those books into a whole bunch of other books I wasn't supposed to read until I'm into, Buddhist integral philosophy and, whatever interfaith conversations that at that point was anathema to absolute heresy. So slippery slope, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah. So at one point you arrived at what sounds like something that looked like Mennonite,
Yeah.
Is that, I don't know if I'm labeling it right. I don't have all my denominations straight, but.
Yeah. As I basically, I found myself at a place where I was disillusioned with what I felt like was a shallow experience of Christianity. And I believed in the beauty and the history and the wealth of Christian experience that was global and certainly through time. But I felt like my own tradition was a little thin. I knew, first of all, chronologically, it's like the new kid on the block for sure. And so I started reaching backwards into some of the more ancient traditions. And I was reading through the lectionary and doing my best to not tell the evangelicals what I was doing, but preaching through the lectionary a little bit. Because they're not used to that stuff. And then, looking into Catholicism, I thought I might be Catholic or Greek Orthodox. I was visiting as many churches as I could on the sly. Whenever I would have someone else teaching, I would be visiting as many kinds of churches as I could, looking for something that was resonant, in my, what I would call soul, that just told me this is true. This is it. This is the experience I'm looking for. Because I was tired of being told to memorize and teach other people's ancient experiences of God. I wanted to know God. I wanted to taste and feel and make love to whatever God is. And I wasn't feeling it in my tradition and Judaism and Greek Orthodox, as I said. And eventually what started to resonate for me was, as you say, Mennonite, or maybe a little bit broader category is Anabaptist theology, which one of the, you can say a lot of things about it, but one of the things that was most attractive was the focus on Jesus, the focus on basically interpreting the rest of the Bible through the red letters, instead of interpreting the whole Bible and then saying, okay, now what do we do with the words of Jesus? Or what I felt like was happening a lot in Protestantism, which is let's interpret Jesus through Paul. That all seemed out of order to me. I'm like, I think everything should go through Jesus. So Anabaptists are great at that. And then the emphasis on nonviolence.
Yeah. I
was kind of been fed up with the nationalist Jesus as the American flag wearing cage fighter stuff that was just so disgusting and detestable to me. Yeah. So in fact, we got really involved with a Anabaptist denomination, specifically in the northeastern part of Canada, and started getting in talks about maybe even merging churches at that point. There's a man I really respect who's a wonderful teacher named Bruxy Cavey up there. We became friends, and that was a really important part of the journey for me. But ultimately, it wasn't the destination. I kept deconstructing from there.
Yeah. It's interesting. A lot of what you're saying resonates with my journey over the last 20 years. One real central truth that seems to be in contrast with a lot of the American evangelical movement is the fact that Christ's path to victory was through the cross.
Correct. Yeah.
That's a pretty profound central truth. It wasn't through the sword or the Roman army. It was through the cross. Yeah. It's like an upside down victory.
Like losers.
Yeah, right. But another, this will make sense in light of what we were talking about before. One of my other strong influences. I read a collection of essays by John Howard Yoder, who you're probably familiar with his work.
Sure.
And one in particular that really resonated was, I think he was talking about, what he was saying was that it's a miracle that Jews exist, that
religiously.
Well, as a people, through all of history, Jews have always been a minority. Ever since the diaspora, Jews have always been an identifiable minority, and not one until fairly recent history with the state of Israel that had any sort of weaponry. Like there was always a larger nation with a lot better weapons, a lot more riches. There's no reason logically that the Jews should still be in existence. They should have been wiped out by the Babylonians, by the Romans, by the, Persians, by every huge, army and empire. And yet they still exist. And in Yoder's essay, he was talking about the miracle of Jesus's victory was similarly through the cross. So what are the things that led to the Jews' persistence in existence? It wasn't through the sword. It was through the law. It was through community. It was through these things, through, principles, integrity, documented in Torah and acted out in daily practice. So these things are more powerful than the sword.
What's interesting to me about the narrative you just shared, Corey, is that I'm the only Jew on this panel, or the only religious Jew on this panel. You're still Jewish. We won't let you go. And
by the way, hit the rabbi when I go to Chabad and visit with my dad or at a bas mitzvah. Rabbi, he'll have me lay tefillin. He always has me do an aliyah with the Torah. So according to the rabbi at Chabad, I'm still, and he knows my deal, but he's, I'm still Jewish.
And you are Jewish. And you were at Mount Sinai when the Torah was given in the whole 9 yards.
Yeah.
See, my answer to your question would be, because it's part of God's plan. That's what it means to be the chosen people. What's interesting is that you are talking about all these secular reasons for our existence, and yet you're an evangelical Christian. The first thing you're supposed to say is it's God's plan.
I was talking about Yoder's essay, Dad. You did it. If you asked me the question, I remember I was at your shul on a Friday night, and the rabbi, well, I don't know if she was a rabbi, but she asked a question, and the answer was because of God, and nobody answered the question. And she said, I finally answered, and she said, "Did you just say that to make me happy?" I said, "No, I didn't say that to make you happy. I said that because that's the answer. The answer is God, because of God."
Yeah, that wasn't Chabad. That was
it wasn't Chabad. It was the shul. It was the little, anyway, sorry. My dad and I are having a whole conversation. It's nice of you to be here, Ryan.
You're doing great.
So 2010, what were some of the mileposts for you along the way to, and we'll talk a lot more about where you're at now, but
Sure.
What were some of those mile markers for you?
Yeah. One powerful one was my grandfather passing away. My mother's father, Sherman Nordquist, was one of the greatest men I've ever known. He was a gentle, kind man who loved people and the earth. He was an elementary school teacher. He taught me everything I know about nature and my love for the outdoors and for creation. And when he passed away, it was 2014. And at this point, I had deconstructed to the place where I was worried that I was just going to be an atheist. And I didn't want to. I wasn't trying to tear anything apart. I was trying to find the solid ground underneath so that I could build something worth giving my life to. And when I got to the bottom and basically there was nothing left, it was sad for me. I wasn't doing this as a rebellious iconoclast. So that's where I was at that mind space in 2014. And when I went to go spread his ashes in the mountains of Oregon with my family, I looked at that little cup of ashes and I thought to myself, the world needs more Sherman Nordquists, but he's nothing like what I'm trying to produce at my church. He doesn't attend church regularly. He wasn't a leader of a small group. He hadn't been through any of the classes on all the essential beliefs of Christian faith. And yet, as I looked at his life and I looked at my own life, and I could see someone who's had richly given themselves in service to love and had walked softly on the earth, and who was faithful to his wife and left behind 5 kids who knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they were deeply loved. And it would hit me like a ton of bricks. I looked into that cup and I was like, I know for a fact my grandfather would say it went really fast. And here I am at the top of the ladder of, I got book deals in my email inbox at least once a month. And I got this big church and everybody wants to hear me teach and to get mad at me when I don't teach every Sunday. And yet I'm lost. I don't know what to believe. And everything I'm giving my life to is not producing more Sherman Nordquists. And that was just like a reeling moment because I'd already lost what I would have called my faith. And now I was realizing that what I was giving all of my life energy to, and it was a lot. I worked hard. I was in a 60, 80 hour work week kind of person. Even when the church was large, I would set up and tear down along with my team. Like I never had a cool green room or a ivory tower. I didn't leave early from my cool parking spot. Like I always worked alongside the lowest paid employee on my staff. So I was putting in some time. So to realize at that point, I don't even believe in what I'm doing anymore was a big turning point for sure.
Yeah, I can't say I had exactly the same experience, but there are similarities. I ran a ministry. It was like a theater ministry. We, in fact, we used our catchphrase was very, very similar to one that RZIM used for a long time: engaging today's culture and conversations that count. We were doing theater and short film and stuff like that, and a lot of it was the we would do the classics. We do Shakespeare and Chekhov and Oscar Wilde plays, just to put ourselves out. And I'm in Southern California, so in West Hollywood, and just getting why are a bunch of Bible thumping Christians doing Chekhov, But I got to a certain point where I just couldn't do it anymore because that particular church, there were some more than secondary beliefs of the church that I didn't buy into that I could sort of reconcile. Like they were young earth creation was a big deal to them. And to me, it just wasn't important. I wasn't going to die on that hill or not die on that hill. It just I was whatevs,
Yeah.
But the one, it started getting real because it was more, there's a certain flavor of evangelicalism where you got to preach the gospel. It's kind of like, whatever you do, you got to make sure that you're selling the good word, the good news, kind of like a crack dealer in a way, like an evangelical, we got cocaine, we got good news, we got hats, whatever it might be. It's just you got to sell that thing. You got to convince a bunch of people to say a magic prayer so they can go to the magic place. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And I just didn't buy it anymore. I didn't, that wasn't, frankly, it just wasn't what I was reading in scripture,
Yeah.
What I was reading in scripture was more I believe there's a creator God. I believe that, chapter 3 in Genesis, something went wrong with the whole deal, and the whole rest of the Bible, to my dad's point, is God had these people descended from Abraham to be a part of his redemption project. He's going about redeeming his creation, right? And through the people of Israel, the chosen people, and then through the people that were then in the new books, the people around the person of Jesus, right? And I get to be a part of that redemption project. But that's very different than look at these 4 verses in this one book, and that's what we call the Romans road. And then if you do that, really believe it, and say it, then you get a pass to our club, in the sky.
More assembly thinking,
Yeah. Sorry, I usually do a lot more question asking, but there's something about you're drawing a lot out of me. Dad, you look like you had something to say at a certain point.
Ironically, I didn't. Naturally, I have 15 reactions to everything you just said. What I find interesting is I don't know what spreading the gospel means. I read the Gospels about 4 times, and if I was spreading the gospel, let's say the Gospels were, and they are actually, I mean, the Gospels is Jewish literature. So when Christians say spreading the gospel, or at least 3 of the 4 Gospels are written by Jews, right? I'm not. They mean something much different than what I mean. When I say I'm going to spread the word of Judaism as reflected in the Hebrew Bible, they're talking about selling the fact that Jesus is God and the Messiah, and this is what's going to happen, as opposed to teaching, well, Jesus said, to love your fellow man as you love yourself.
That's it right there, you guys, because I hated that. For instance, I just got to harp on this because all the talk about you got to preach the gospel. I can't tell you how many conferences I went to where at least one of the pastors gets up and just screams at all the other pastors that they're not preaching the gospel enough. And I couldn't agree with you more there, because if we're going to just read what we call the Gospels, these are the stories of the life and teaching of Jesus. And if you're going to try to lift out what the central theme is, I can't imagine that you wouldn't land on the Beatitudes. So if we're supposed to preach the gospel, then we should be preaching the Beatitudes. Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn. Right? Let's preach the good news, which is that's Beatitudes, is liberating good news, because it's totally counterintuitive, very Jewish, paradoxical language that Jesus is teaching there. That seems okay, let's teach that. But what they're saying when they say teach the gospel is this formulaic epistemological gymnastics theology that you have to, as you said, believe Jesus is God. There's an inherent threat that if you don't believe something or do these things, you'll be sent to hell. So mitigate the inherent threat. It's just basically like lawyer speak for evangelicals. And that's where you lose modern people, I think, because you have to buy into a magical blood sacrifice as the central thing to worry about in Christianity. You have to buy into that. And unless you grew up in that worldview, it's just, for modern people, that's just such a long stretch that somewhere somebody killed someone, and that if you believe it, it's magically gets you to a magic place. It's hard to buy into. But I really appreciate you bringing up that if we're going to talk about the gospel, we've so missed it if we're not going to actually read the Gospels to understand what the gospel is.
Yeah. I was thinking that Beatitudes make sense. I was thinking you were going to go with the central, love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself.
Shema.
Yeah, that's the Shema.
That's the thing. That's older.
Hey, Dad, I was going to ask you, I know you've heard me tell the story about the first time I read through the New Testament letters and books, that I got to chapter 5 of Matthew. I didn't recognize it as the Sermon on the Mount. I didn't know what that was, but what I did recognize it as, having grown up in an Orthodox synagogue, was this Jesus character giving what I recognized as a Devar Torah. When you read did you read it that way?
Absolutely. It reminded me of the Kaddish, which is what we say. I don't know, I must say it 25 times a day because I pray 3 times a day. And, we say the Kaddish in a number of formats. And basically it's the sermon on, Jesus plagiarized the sermon, didn't plagiarize it. He was Jewish. It was basically the Kaddish.
As Pete Seeger would say, hey, they might be stealing from me, but I steal from everybody. Plagiarism is basic to all culture.
Plagiarism. It's all plagiarized.
That's right. Are you a Pete Seeger fan by any chance?
You talking to me?
I know you are, Dad. We've been to we went to dozens, if not hundreds, of shows. May he rest in peace. But yeah, if you ever get a chance to listen to his music, or especially the recordings of his
You
live.
didn't let him answer, Corey.
What? No,
You didn't let Ryan answer.
No, I did. I said, I haven't really listened to him much. I know who he is, though.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now he preaches the gospel, the kind of gospel I could definitely buy into, even in my cynical old age. What are you doing? What do you believe now? What are you doing now? You've really
How do you identify?
Yeah.
I don't know that well, for me, I don't care. So it ends up being like, what's helpful for the person that I'm working with, or interacting with or meeting? What do I believe? I mean, I believe that this is real, that this experience we're having is real, and that it matters. And that ultimately love is the purpose for all of this. I mean, if I really want to condense it, cancer sort of whittled me down to nothing, to where I realized, like, look, I don't know. I don't have the answers, but I'm grateful to be alive. Life is a gift is probably the first thing. And the second thing is love is the point. I mean, and that's, I got that tattooed on my hands. Life is a gift. Love is the point. That's what I believe. I believe that gratitude for this experience, which is beautiful. And then the response to that, the natural response to receiving this life is love, is to pour yourself out in service to love. So, but other than that, I just don't really care too much about the things I used to get stuck in with people, these arguments about truth claims that can neither be proven true nor false. I'm more interested in, how does your current beliefs help you manifest a life of greater meaning, service, joy, inner peace? Like I'm interested in the pragmatic, what Jesus would call fruit of your beliefs. So whatever you're believing, I'm not too worried about. If it's a unicorn spaghetti monster in the sky, whatever, enjoy it. But does it make you kinder? Are you slower to anger? How do you use your resources? Like that's what I'm more interested in.
So you're not a pastor anymore.
Correct.
And you're not affiliated with the church anymore.
Nope.
Do you attend, like, I don't know if there are like gatherings or services or anything like that, or so you're just doing your thing?
Yeah. I mean, I do group meditation sometimes here in our town. We have a group of meditators who meet in the morning and meditate, but there's no sectarian identifier. There are Hindus and Buddhists and atheists and Jews and New Age eclectic, whatevers. We're not worried about that. We're there to, touch the still point, or the Buddha nature, or Christ consciousness, so that we can actually live from that place of loving awareness in our daily lives. Everyone goes off to work after that. And so the point would be to, get into greater relationship or communion with the absolute, whatever you name it, so that we can live in exchange of love with the people around us and find ways to serve and give ourselves away.
Do you think it's fool's errand to try to name it, to try to define it, or is it best to keep it ineffable?
I think that I'm sure it's a Jewish parable where these two guys are arguing back and forth, and yeah, I can't even remember how it ends, but it's something along the lines of God shows up and is like getting frustrated that they're trying to nail it down. Yeah. I don't think it's a fool's errand. I think it's an essential part of being human, like to reach out and try to define the experience we're having. I think when it goes negative is when we try to use our definitions as weapons against one another. Like the point is, love everyone and convert yourself. But fundamentalism says convert everyone because you love yourself so much, or your own ideas so much.
I think you're leaving a piece out.
Yeah, great. What is it?
In my journey, I was not religious at all until about 15, 20 years ago, and I become more and more and more observant, more religious. And the question is, why should I keep kosher? I mean, it's a very mundane thing. And the answer is because God says so. Period. The end. So now, how does that relate to my experience of God in my life? Okay. I have an issue with this, kumbaya. All we have to do is get in touch with our divine spirit in our heart and then go out into the world and spread love and do all that stuff. My life experience tells me that most people need a discipline, and they need to be reminded of that constantly, that I'm responsible to an authority larger than myself. Okay. And once you give up the discipline, you give up that constant reminder that I'm subservient to a larger set of values than something that I can concoct up in my own mind. Because people are very good at rationalizing doing terrible things for the right reasons. That's the thing that I have to fight against. And not eating ham is part of that exercise. Every time I eat, I'm subjecting myself to a discipline, not because it's going to keep me healthy, not because it's good for me in a selfish way, not because it's going to get me to heaven, simply because I'm acknowledging that there's something bigger than me that I'm subservient to.
And I love that. I'm just saying when it gets negative is when you need me to do that.
That makes sense.
I love that.
That
like
makes
if
sense.
that's cultivating in you humility, the ability to see yourself in a larger frame of reality. Absolutely. To me, I don't think religion is necessary for that. Nature shows us that. Nature proves to us every day that we are not in control and that everything that we are is in relationship to a larger reality. I don't think you need God or any religious language or rules for that. Like if you are out of right relationship to the broader narrative of an ecological system, you will pay the price of being out of relationship to reality. You cannot keep polluting the water and live. So the laws of reality are, I think, even more, there's more vengeance for violating the laws of nature than there is for any gods.
The place where you're wrong is that you don't need it, but most people do. Most people do need that. I need that discipline to remind me every moment I'm alive that I'm subservient to something bigger than me. And another big difference, if that Corey didn't point out earlier between Jews and Christians is, except for a very brief period in our history, we've never been a proselytizing religion. In fact, we discourage people from converting.
Exactly.
You want to be a Jew? We're going to cut a piece of your penis off.
Exactly. That's what I love about it. It's actually a real initiation, which we've lost. I mean, most cultures had actual hardcore initiations before you get in. Now it's like, who can build the biggest group of, fair weather tourist interest people. And that's one thing I deeply respect about Judaism. I will agree that there are definitely stages of consciousness that require more control. We know this is true in child development. Just the way human beings grow up requires more structure at the lower levels. But the idea that everyone, that just gets too universal for me. It's just not true. There are plenty of people who don't need a reason for love. Like I don't. I think there could be a being that's conscious, that's aware and created all of this. And I don't know.
If love means caring more about the welfare of someone else than yourself, then maybe you do need a God to believe that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't, but I don't want to love your neighbor more than you love yourself. I think that ends up being a journey towards self-abandonment. I think the key is to love yourself enough so that you can love others, because any self-loathing will come out in your relating to others.
I love my wife and my kids and grandkids more than I love myself. And I think that's a good thing.
Okay, sure. Well, like I said, the beauty of having left religion behind is that I don't need someone to see the world the same way as me. What I hope for is that whatever practices, whether they be kosher or praying to Mecca, that they actually result in a deep sense of feeling alive, feeling an ability to trust life. Some people call that faith, but that word's fine for me. To me, it's a feeling in the body of, look, whatever happens, no matter how awful it feels in the moment, I trust that the large sort of end point of where we're being pulled, where the future is drawing us all, is to be trusted and is good. And so however you get there, I'm all for it.
Do you believe that there is something in every human being, perhaps in every creature, that is like a compass that points north, that the thing in human beings being something that draws us towards what is good and or what you might call love, or I don't know. I mean, I'm struggling with this.
I do.
You do.
But yes, the short answer is yes. Did you want to dig into that?
Yeah. I'm reading this book right now. A friend of mine wrote a memoir. She's about 60, maybe 61. And she wrote a memoir. I never knew this about her. She grew up from the age of about 4 until she was 14 on her grandfather's farm in central/western Pennsylvania. And her grandfather serially sexually abused her. It's actually a very poignant, powerful, beautiful book, because it's not about that per se, so much as it is about her overcoming that and that not defining her. But I bring it up because the character of Pap, the grandfather in this book, Blind Pony, got me really thinking about the human condition, and that I tend to agree with your assessment that there is something innate in us that points us toward the good and even draws us toward the good. And even this character, Pap, did things to show that he intellectually knew what was good. Like he'd pray before meals because he knew that looked like what he was doing was good. He told his granddaughter, now we need to keep this quiet, and did things to make sure that she kept it quiet because he understood that what he was doing was bad. So intellectually, he knew good things and he knew bad things, and he tried to put on that appearance. But there was something missing in him that allowed him to breach that gap between something that we know to be vilely, basely bad, evil, right? Like, like we just innately know this, and we find, but there was something in him that was deadened, or maybe just didn't exist. I've said only half jokingly that I really don't think Donald Trump is human, and it's only half joking because, like, look, there are certain things that make us uniquely human. If I were to write an actual dissertation to make the empirical proof that he's not really human, some of the chapters would include the fact that if you've ever seen him in a room where music is playing, humans understand and literally resonate with music. There's something that's beautiful about what we're hearing, and we move to music. We respond to music. We literally resonate. Watch Donald Trump in a room where music is playing. It doesn't penetrate his it doesn't penetrate at all. Or laughter. Laughter is a wonderful thing. It's you could argue one way or the other that maybe certain animals, especially in the mammalian world, laugh, but he doesn't laugh the way that we laugh out of joy or laugh because of a joke. The only laughter that you might see is sort of a cruelty, an expression of cruelty in some way, shape, or form. So I'm only half joking when I say I don't know if he's human. Yeah. Sorry. Another tangent, but it goes back to the original question. Maybe you want to comment on it a little bit more about. So you do think there is something in us like a compass that draws us towards love, towards what we think of as good?
Absolutely. My sense of, it's easy to get into these, like, especially for me, like I'm interested in conversations about consciousness and the nature of reality and philosophy, but it is really easy to get trapped in the cul-de-sac of, words and lose sight of, like, the real animal experience of being in a body stuck in a dimension of time that only moves in one direction, and not really knowing for certain, besides agreements perhaps we've made with other people's ideas or religious notions, about what happens after all this breathing in and breathing out is over. So when I really get quiet enough to feel into the experience, I think it's really obvious that love is the engine of the universe, at some level, whether you want to call that love allurement or you want to use that romantic version of love. But there's something that is drawing us together. That's something that makes us stare at the beauty of a sunset. Like, we have this intrinsic need to connect and to give and to self-sacrifice, to make meaning. And I think that's all wrapped up in whatever we're trying to describe when we use the word God. I still like the word God. I usually try to define it so people know that I'm not talking about some bearded, angry guy in the sky who's judging everything like Santa Claus and putting you on lists. But the idea, the experience of God, of this transformative future that's pulling us all forward. And I know it's been a hard is the wrong word. Can I say shitty on this podcast? It's been a shitty 4 years.
Yeah.
But when you look at our history over the last, let's really look at human, 200,000 years, we really have come a long way. And we're learning how to live more in line with that compass point that keeps pulling us in rapid growth. When you really look at the chart, right, it's really up and to the right with how we're learning how to work with each other. Now, there's been some huge setbacks. Nothing's climbing steadily. We're 2 steps forward, 1 step back, certainly. Maybe it's my naivete, or it's the last shred of faith that I won't let go of. Hope. Yes. I believe that we can do better, that we will do better, that in the end, love wins and that love is never wasted. And that without having a bunch of definitions or certitudes, I just trust that if I give myself to love, that things will work out. Yeah.
Yeah, that does make sense. Even with the paradigm that I have, central to my paradigm, I kind of articulated it before, is that I do believe that there is a redemption project underway, a much larger one, universal, that's underway. And so digging a little bit deeper, one of my favorite theologians, a guy named J. Cameron Carter, described it in jazz terms. When Coltrane was playing with Thelonious Monk, their virtuosity was really at a peak because they were playing among other virtuosos, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, their unique individual expression and where they brought music as a whole was never more individually more fully expressed. So they had that duality of being in the context of other virtuosos playing in the band.
Yeah.
And sort of because of that, their individual beauty was heightened at the same time, Now, I'm not saying that I'm Monk or Coltrane in this, but I do feel that everyone is so unique and can bring such beautifully individual, unique talents and gifts to the party of, if we call it a redemption project.
Yeah.
But you're just a part of it. It's not, I'm not the center of the universe per se, but I get to be a really cool part of this universal project.
What a relief, right?
Yeah. Right. It's not on my shoulders.
Yeah, so. Absolutely not. So we could relax and do our little part to, every day is going to be 1,000 choices to choose the highest good or the selfish choice,
Yeah. Yeah.
The good news is when we screw up the one, we choose selfishness, we'll have another shot soon enough. And we just always 2 escalators. There's one going up and one going down. And we sort of live our lives hopping back and forth and making decisions throughout the day that either elevate us in our consciousness or lower us. And I think Jesus said it well, that when thine eye be single, your whole body will be full of light. And when we actually direct all of our energies, physical and spiritual and mental, into riding that higher up-leveling escalator that says, choose the highest good in each and every moment, then there'll just be this lightness of being, this relaxation of trust and this ability to give ourselves away, because selfishness is always pulling us into the fear mode, into the scarcity mode, into the, oh no, it's all going to fall apart and I have so much to lose. And I think those are always the choices. You can go into the letting go and the giving yourself away and, to use Jesus's words, to take up your cross and die to yourself, or you can take the lower escalator and you can close your heart and you can protect your stuff and you can worry about your neighbor and get all into conspiracy theories and live in that kind of space. And I think we all know that there's two very distinct, different kinds of people that are produced through those ideologies.
The duality that's interesting to me, and that was dramatized through the Trump years, especially. Public life was so awful in America, but personal life in whatever in the various communities that I live in is beautiful, even with friends who I disagree with violently politically. As long as we could leave that political bullshit someplace else, life got better. Life got richer. People were more nurturing. I didn't put a yarmulke on until about 2 or 3 years ago, and it was related to something.
You could say it, Dad.
Well, say what? Why I put the yarmulke on?
Yeah.
One of my grandchildren had a drug problem and a dependency issue, an addictive issue, and made a choice to become sober and clean. And I said, I'm going to choose to put a yarmulke on now. I've been playing with being an Orthodox Jew, an observant Jew for 10, 12, 13 years now. Now I'm going to make it real to be in this journey with you. This is, my symbolic way of walking your walk with you.
Beautiful.
Jackie Boy is 26 months sober. Last Friday, I think it was. Yeah.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
But my experience of wearing a yarmulke all of a sudden, I'd say 90% of the reactions I get from the Gentile world are validating, beautiful, loving, real empathy and respect. And about 10% is really horrible and ugly. And I think, that's the equation that we need to use in terms of separating out the public stuff from our real lives.
Absolutely. Face-to-face, better barometer than what they put on the television.
But not even on the television. I mean, Trump is a real person. These people are real people. But our own universes we have control over.
That's right.
Yeah. This has been a much more philosophical conversation than I anticipated. I feel like I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about one of the more high profile events was when the Time magazine came out, I think in 2015. What kind of, you were such a high profile figure in the evangelical movement or the megachurch movement, however you might want to define it. What kind of backlash did you have to face at that point?
I mean, your standard hate mail, and I actually did get some death threats, and just basically a year of conversations with people in the community who wanted to argue me back into whatever they needed me to think. And of course, that included like the loss of some friendships, and basically all the people who had been mentoring me from the evangelical world just sort of they stopped calling. Those relationships were over. They couldn't be associated with me. So, yeah, I mean, it was. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, wow, that was a really hard season, which it was. I had thousands of people abandon me publicly. Some people go to therapy for abandonment issues from a single person who abandoned them, and I had thousands of people who said they loved me on, Friday and hated me on Monday and all left me and all wanted to make comments about it on the internet on their way out. So on one level, it was really painful. On another level, put that 300 years ago, I'd have been burned at the stake. So I feel pretty good about it.
In relation, I guess it's,
boo-hoo, people don't like me. This is what my gay friends have been dealing with their whole lives. So, and I was being rejected for what I thought theologically, and my friends have been being rejected for who they are their whole lives. So in some ways it was a gift to, in a tiny way, carry a burden in a way that I could identify with my friends who, in just to very small way, just to taste what it felt like and what they had been living through their whole lives. And I think that was good for me. I mean, I'm a cisgendered heterosexual male, a white male. And in America, I don't really know what it feels like to be on the bottom of any of these social rankings. And so I think it was good for me. It wasn't easy, but it was good for me.
Have you thought at all sociologically about why that is? Meaning, why is the LGBTQ, why is that such a flashpoint of controversy within the church? I mean, if you really read your Bible, the Bible's about a lot of other stuff than like who we go to bed with, do you know why it's such a flashpoint for us?
Yeah. I mean, it's human nature to avoid the obvious stuff when it's hard, when it requires more of us. So we like to fixate on the things that are not our problem, so we can feel like we're on a journey towards righteousness, when really we're avoiding the very obvious things. Like, for instance, I mean, I've read the Bible all the way through a few times myself. I did it twice in 1 year, in fact. Now, nobody's going to read that thing, close it, and at the end say, well, it's about not being gay, They're going to, if anything, I wonder if they're not going to come to the conclusion that the way you treat the poor really fucking matters.
Yeah.
Right. But Americans, what's maybe one thing Americans, maybe especially socioeconomically upper middle class Americans and the average evangelical megachurch, what's the one thing they don't want to hear about every Sunday? Right. Some social justice in relation to economic systemic injustice. So you pick on the things that are easy to throw over the fence. And historically, that's certainly included women. So we're all worried about what clothing women wear, or, whatever they're doing to sexually tempt men. And then in some way, I think that's definitely related to the way that the church and really our broader culture has marginalized and oppressed maybe something that would be like a more effeminate expression of being a man. So I think those two things are tied. And sex is something that's been controlled by every institution and government ever since we started civilization. You can't really have people doing whatever they want, right? You need tax units, and even the way that we stole land from Native Americans was directly related to the ways that we partner in white Western culture. We're like, okay, you can have this much land if you are married with kids. And so it's baked in to the structure of the way we govern the land and tax people, that the way you express yourself or partner sexually be heteronormative. So there's a lot of reasons why it's such a deal. But, being afraid of sex and having runaway sexual scandal. I mean, we were just talking about it before we came on, and how many times do we need to see evangelicals when high profile getting caught for the very things they rail against? Like, whatever's in the shadow is going to be what you're coming out against publicly. And so it's no surprise to me that evangelicals who have all this righteousness about who's wrong in their sexual expression, that ends up being the group that's being exposed for having issues. I mean, the number one porn consumption in America is in the South. The number one teen pregnancy in the South, right? These are the places where we teach abstinent-only sex education.
Yeah.
They're all connected. This is all connected. And it's a willingness. This is the problem with Christianity from the perspective of depth psychology. And that is that we don't deal with the shadow, because we have a magical sacrifice that supposedly takes care of it. So we don't have to actually integrate the shadow. Jesus paid it all, and so we don't do any work with the actual shadow that's here, because we have a belief in a magical transaction that makes that something we don't have to deal with. And it's just not true. That's why we have all these people acting out of the shadow and then going, I don't know what happened. I've only been going to massage parlors for 50 years straight. Come on, man.
Yeah. Dad, you look like you had something to say.
I just, when I read about these kinds of sexual scandals in the fundamentalist church, my reaction is kind of paradoxical. I say to myself, these are human beings. Why should we be surprised that there's the same level of corruption, sexual exploitation and hypocrisy among evangelicals as in the rest of the population. I mean, we shouldn't be harder on these people than we are on others who do the same things. This is what human beings are like. This is part of being a human being. That's why discipline is important.
Yeah, I think part of the problem is that there's a scandal at all, that we have this idea that, we know the ways people should express their sexuality. I mean, obviously, we don't want people in non-consensual oppressive relationships with where the power dynamic is screwed up, for instance, child abuse or whatever. But the idea that we have some rules about like who you're allowed to love or how many people you're allowed to love is part of the issue. Like, these are just, in my view, made up concepts that are torturing people, and it's like, just let people do what they want. The issue is when people who are preaching, you can't do this, is generally the people who are about to be exposed for doing exactly that.
Getting caught with their pants down, quite literally.
Exactly.
Well, I feel like we could talk here for another couple hours. I know I got a lot rattling around in my brain. But let me just ask a few more questions here to wrap up. One is, anything come to mind that we forgot to ask you that we should be asking you?
No, I'm not in charge. Whatever you think is more interesting or helpful for you guys.
Okay. Another question is, do you have any questions for us?
Well, yeah. How about if you want, I could ask a question about you and your dad's relationship and how you've navigated mutual respect and admiration and love while crossing religious boundaries.
I'll answer that because Corey's going to get it all wrong.
Well, I do want to say before you start that the look on his face right now, in the dictionary, the Yiddish dictionary, there's a word nachas. And that picture is next to the word nachas.
Okay.
When Corey announced he was a Christian, I grew up in a world where if I dated a non-Jewish girl, some relatives would have sat shiva. They would have pretended I was dead.
Oh my! Is that real? Is it for real?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh my God!
I'm a first generation American. My mom was born in the shtetl in Russia, and my whole extended family came over in 1921.
Wow.
I was also raised with the.
It's sorry, I was going to say it's almost exactly the 100-year anniversary of their arrival at Ellis Island.
March will be the 100-year anniversary that they came to America through Ellis Island. I was also raised explicitly, not even implicitly, but explicitly, that my mission in life was to guarantee the survival of Judaism by marrying a Jewish girl, having Jewish children, and making sure that my children married other Jews and had Jewish children. That was my mission in life. So when Corey announced that he was a Christian, I had to make a very profound decision. What's more important to me, God or my child? My relationship with God or my relationship with my child? At least the God that I was taught to believe in. Mm-hmm. And it didn't take me very long to figure out that there was nothing that was going to break. There was nothing either of my kids could do that would cause me to end my relationship with my kids and to stop loving them. So once I came to that realization, everything else flowed from that, from my point of view. I had to start listening. I had to start accepting. I had to start learning to be a father who accepted the fact that even though my kid is wrong, I love him and he's going to go on his journey and I'm going to stop criticizing it. It's not my job to tell him what to do and what not to do. My job is just to love him and support him. That's my job. And everything's, from my end, everything flowed from there.
Yeah.
As long as I can keep telling him that he's wrong all the time.
I love that. I appreciate that so much because, obviously my father and I are in different worlds now, and he's still an evangelical minister, and we always had a wonderful relationship. And so it's nice to hear when people are able to navigate the same, boundary line crossing that we did and make it out the other side, because we do have a good relationship. It's definitely different. We used to share the faith and we were both ministers together, but it's nice to hear when, how people navigate that well. And in some ways it's a defense of the paradigm that I'm offering, because at the end of the day, when you decide, I'm going to choose my own son over this particular religious orientation, that's exactly what I try to encourage people to consider. And that is that you already have the compass within you. You know what love looks like and feels like. And sometimes that means betraying your, religious ideals, at least that you were raised with, to choose an ethic that is just undeniable within you. And even though that's not structure as much as sometimes we talk about people needing that, there's just something within us that knows, like, I know this is what's right. And love, even though it can be hippy dippy and a kumbaya sometimes, it really is the answer.
Yeah. And listen, don't get me wrong. There is a lot of hard work and pain.
I believe it.
And turmoil. Those first 3 years especially those were hard years, but we both put in the time. Literally, like, we both put in hundreds of hours of time, crafting emails back and forth, many whiskeys, and we were still smoking cigars at that time, over around a fire pit, but yeah, we put in the time, and
well, it shows.
Yeah. So, and I think that's, it's not just a personal experience. I think there's a lot of contentiousness in the world right now. I think we were talking about this before, a lot of the public discourse is really defined by contentiousness, by two immovable objects just kind of throwing rocks at each other from across a divide. I just don't think that's doing anything good. I don't think anybody's scoring any imaginary points. I don't think anything productive is happening. I think destructive things are happening. So to the degree that a couple people can get into that divide, can get into that chasm, and it might look ugly, it might look messy, but I think it's good work. I think it's worthy work, and it's needed to counterbalance those rock throwers,
I agree. Thanks for being an example of that, guys.
Yeah. Ryan, before we go, how can we find you, and how can we find some of the work that you're doing? And,
Yeah, I have a website, ryantmeeks.com. T is in Tom in the middle there. That's my middle initial for Thomas. And then I'm on Instagram at Ryan T. Meeks. But yeah, that's where you can find me. I do spiritual direction and psychedelic integration, relationship coaching, and rewilding wilderness guiding stuff with my friend Kent. And that's all on there.
RyanTmeeks.com. Ryan T. Meeks, it was a really cool thing to hang out with you today. My mind, like I said, is swimming. I feel like I got a lot more work to do now and a lot more thinking to do. Might have to revisit with you, go on one of those if there's a hotel nearby, a 5-star hotel nearby any of these nature, no,
huh? No showers for days.
Oh, geez. Okay. All right. Anyway, it was really cool to hang out with you. I really appreciate you taking the time.
Thanks, guys. It was really fun for me.
Thanks, Pops. Have a good day.
Take care.
Thank you for joining us today. If you appreciate what you've heard here, please go to iTunes or anywhere you get your podcasts. Give us a 5-star rating and leave a review. That really helps move us up the chart so others can find out what we're up to here. For Ronnie Nathan, I'm Corey Nathan, and we've been talking politics and religion without killing each other. We'll be back in a few days to do our little part in Tikkun Olam.